Hi, good evening.
Rabbi.
Okay, so we're going to the next halacha bet. Let me just make sure we finished what we did yesterday. Yeah, so we'll do the Ramah here, just in case. So it says, "Ve'en chiluk ben b'zeh ben אם הוא חי לגמרי או שנתבשל קצת." It says there's no difference between something which is totally raw or something which was a little bit cooked. All those halachot that we mentioned yesterday apply to both cases. בכל זמן שחלל הגוף שלם, so it says all the while that the body is full, even though you don't have the head there and the legs, it's called like a full body for this halacha, you know. So the truth is, as we said right yesterday, we don't really do this thing with the coating the oven and and plastering and all this. We don't do that today, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. But for us, it's more relevant to talk about the issue of roasting, things like this, which does happen today. We said that. So now he says, so now he brings another opinion, right? Which we saw in the Bit Yosef, which is not exactly what we said yesterday, a little bit different. So what does that mean? That this is more like a chumrah, this one more stringent, that if the oven is plastered, closed, shut, then everything is allowed. So why is that? Because once it's plastered, they're not going to bother to open it, to stir the coals. So therefore, it's allowed. We have no problem with that. So then the other issue is this. The other scenario is if you have an open flame, a kol asur, there everything is forbidden. So meaning to say that you shouldn't be roasting meat right before Shabbat on an open flame and just leaving it like that. He says, what about the oven, right, where there's a door, and the door is shut, but it's not lined with plaster. So then we make a differentiation, right? What does that mean? Between the kid and the chicken, right? And on the other side, the rest of the types of meat. So meaning what? That with these small animals, right, we're more stringent because they can get, I'm sorry, just the opposite, right? Because they can get charred, we're more lenient with them. But when it comes to other meat, which is not going to get charred if you stir the coals, so therefore we're more stringent, and we say that we're concerned he's going to stir the coals. So says the Ramah, "Ve'achi nahug b'kisvar hazos." The Ashkenazim apparently they go like this. They go like this minhag, like this opinion. as opposed to the opinion we said yesterday. Let's just go over that, right, and see what the difference is here. According to the first opinion, when it comes to beef or goat, right, buck, whatever you call it, aval, it's allowed. Just the opposite, right? Those two are not allowed. And then, on the other hand, and also chicken is the same. So what are we talking about? They're cut up into pieces. So when they're cut up into pieces, they're more prone to I'm sorry, just the opposite. The first way was right. That these are permitted. Why? Because we're not concerned that he's going to stir the coals with them. Why is that? Since they're cut up into pieces, they're going to get charred. So let me say that again, right? I said like several ways, it didn't come out right. So let me just make sure we get it the right way. According to the first opinion, right? One more time. If we're talking about beef or goat, it's forbidden. On the other hand, if you have kid or chicken and they're cut up into pieces, so then it's permitted. Why? Because he's not going to stir it up because it will get charred. But if it's in the oven, the tachbi batin, and he plastered it, ben gedi be'of, whether it's goat, right, a kid or chicken in their full body, or whether it's beef or goat, these are all allowed. Why? Because if he opens it up, right, that plaster, it's going to get damaged. The meat like that. The wind, the air damages it. So that's the first opinion, right? And the second opinion is like what the Rama says. So it turns out, right, that the second opinion is a bit more stringent. Believe it or not. Okay, great. So I guess we'll go on from there. Ma says that that's the minhag by them, the second opinion, right? So by us, the minhag is like the first opinion. That's how we pass him. That's the difference. Okay, great. So I guess we'll go to the next one. Bet. So it says here, says the Tur, En solin basar batzal ubetza. We don't roast meat, eggs, right, or onions. I'm just looking at the Torah inside here. Yeah. The only way you can do these things is that it should be already roasted before Shabbat. Yom kimachal ben drusai, right? Only 1/3 cooked. Has to be at least 1/3 cooked by before Shabbat. So that means he's poskening like the other opinion, right? Hanania. Okay, we'll see about that. Anyway, right? So there's also another thing, which is that what about baking bread, right? Chalot, whatever. So there also says over here like this, right? So if you put some bread in there, right, to bake, it has to be already form a crust on the outside before Shabbat comes in. Otherwise, you shouldn't do it. So what does that mean? That it's going to form a crust on the side which is facing the fire. So he says really either side, right? In other words, once it forms a crust on one side or the other, that's already good enough. So what's the reason for that? Same reason, right? We're concerned about stirring the coals. So what does that mean? For our ovens, right, it shouldn't really apply because we don't stir the coals and stuff like that. So it says if you put it close, right, the chashikah, close to darkness, right? And it didn't get a crust, didn't form a crust. If you did it on purpose, right, it's forbidden to eat that. Until Shabbat goes out. And time it takes to bake it. If he did it right inadvertently, he's allowed to mazon shel. He can take enough bread for 3 meals. For himself, and then he tells other people, each one can take 3 meals also, right? His neighbors, he's going to call his neighbors, right? And tell them, go for it. Take 3 meals worth. So it says also, right, once when you're removing it from the oven, right, don't use your your normal, what do they call that, right? That removes the bread, the rake, whatever. What do they call that thing? So instead of using that, you should use the a knife, which is like abnormal. Shinui. Something like that. Don't do it the usual way, right? That you do on weekdays. ואם נתנו בשבת, אפילו במזיד. So he says, if he puts it on Shabbat, even on purpose, mutar, it's allowed, lo lirdotar kolem sheofek. So he can remove it before it bakes, so this way it won't bake. You should try to prevent it from baking. In order that it shouldn't come to being liable to death, right? Because of baking the bread on Shabbat. So again, right, to reiterate, what are we saying? That if he puts it in there on Shabbat by mistake, whatever, he should remove it right away, because otherwise it'll bake. Then he'll be liable. Okay, I think this is the end of the tour here. Let's go to Bet Yosef. So it says in the Bet Yosef, Mishnah Sham, right? He brings the source for this. It's a Mishnah over there in Masechet Shabbat, Yud Tet Amud Aleph. So it says there, En solin basar, right? Batzalu betzar. We don't bake the meat, right, and or the onion or the bread, the egg, unless you can cook it before Shabbat, right? So the Gemara, it says in Gemara there, Bekama, how much does it have to be cooked? Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rab, Kadesh Sheitzolu Mibel Yom. That is Kemachal Medusa. He says, right, it has to be cooked 1/3. Otherwise, you're not allowed to do it. So even though that Rabbeinu said right close by that when it comes to roasted meat, right, even if it's raw, if it's right next to on the fire, you're not allowed to put it next to next to Shabbat. He wrote that we don't roast it to teach you that if it was roasted, right, 1/3, then it's okay. So in other words, what we said that it's forbidden is only when it's raw, but when it's 1/3, it's okay. Okay, great. So it says Bet Yosef, right? Furthermore, Katav Aran says Aran, the Divrei Arif, according to Rif, he says, "Sheoser lishot afilu nitbashel kemachal ben dusai." He forbids it, right? Even when it's machal ben dusai, 1/3. Lo tikshe, he says, don't ask this question. Meha de sharia, the matnitin, from where here that we allow this here. K'dei sheitzolu mibad yom kemachal ben dusai deacha. But my askinan says why? It's not the same thing. Why? Because here we're dealing with keshenatzman munachim alesh, but they are put on the fire, they themselves. So once they came to 1/3 cooking, The problem is, that if he would now stir the coals, he's gonna char them. Rambam also says that Pek Bet Gimel and Solin Basar. He says, right, same thing. We don't roast meat, right, or onions or eggs al gabe esh on top of the fire. Unless they're going to be roasted before Shabbat, etc. Right? And if they stayed afterwards on the fire, mutar, it's allowed, no problem. Why? Because at that point, once they're 1/3 cooked, then it's already getting cooked more, and the quality is going down. It's getting dried out. Why? Because if he would stir the coals, right, it would really get charred. That's the thing, So therefore, we're not concerned about that. So here's the thing, right, that you see from there, when it comes to roasted meat, grilled meat, so once it's 1/3 cooked, you're allowed to leave it there. We're not afraid he's going to stir the coals because he's gonna char it, and so it doesn't resemble the case that we spoke about before. You said over there that 1/3 is according to Hananiah, but here it seems like 1/3 is according to everybody because it's a different scenario here. Okay. So then he says, we said this already. Okay, let's move on. So he says, that's what Rav Magid says. It's according to this, he says, if they're not on the fire, they would not be allowed to leave them like that. Unless it's really, bad for it to cook more. So meaning what? That there's a difference between being on the fire, like on the grill, or being in a pot. Not the same thing. So when it comes to being on the grill, we say, right, that after it's 1/3 cooked, there's no problem. But when it comes to being in the pot, that's not enough. It has to be fully cooked. So what does that mean, fully cooked? If you would cook it anymore, it would already, the quality would already go down the tubes. All right, let's move on. Rashi, but it says, according to Rashi, he says, V'siato, according to his colleagues there, right, the sharu le'ashot kishnit bashil kamal that they allow even for other cases, right, to leave it 1/3 cooked. Be'od yom, ma'ire b'matritin afilu kishenam munachim al esh. Then we have to say that the Mishnah is talking about where it's not even on the fire at all. It's not placed on the fire. Ela samuch le'esh, it's just next to the fire. Vehi gufa kamashmanan. So it comes to teach you dechol shenitzlu kemachal ben drusai, that once it was cooked 1/3, shar le'shuya kedin kora kedera. So then you're allowed to leave it just like the issue with the pot. Dechol shenit bashil kemachal ben drusai shar le'shuya, because anything which is 1/3 cooked is already mutar, right? To leave it like that. Okay, fantastic. Let me just get a glass of water. I'll be right back, Louis. Okay, so let's move on. It says Bet Yosef, you should know, he says that Sheim lo nitzla ela mitzad echad. If it was baked, if it was roasted on one side only, kemachal ben rusai, like 1/3. Amina mepek kol minachot beot matzah. The lav klum hu, right? So he said that's not really significant. It has to be on both sides, 1/3 cooked. Katvot Rambam, it says Rambam Bertet Milian Chiyuv Chatat regarding the some other issue, right? He wrote this Rambam. Mashma dehava dehu adin linyan din zeh. So it says that implies that the same thing applies here as well. To Maishna, what difference does it make, right? It's all the same. So meaning what? When we say 1/3 cooked, it has to be on both sides 1/3 cooked. Otherwise, it doesn't work. If it's raw on one side, that's not good. No good. Okay, so that was bet, I think. So we'll go to Shulchan Aruch. It says like this, and solin batzel ubatzal basarai. So as we said, right, when it comes to roasting things, like meat, eggs, vegetables, agav gechalim, and you're doing it on the coals, right? Meaning what? You're doing it on the grill, right? Like we do on the grill. So what happens over there? Or barbecue, right? Same thing. So so if you're doing that before Shabbat, it has to be right. Kemachal mendusai has to be 1/3 cooked before Shabbat starts. Sheu chatzi bishulo, right? So here it says it's half. Oh, okay. So before, right, we said 1/3, right? Here it says it's half. So apparently we paskin, that it's half. It's not really 1/3, because the truth is that we went like back and forth with this. There's a machloket about it. At first we said half, then we went to 1/3. There was another place it was written like 1/3, but now here he says it's a half. So it has to be half cooked, which is like rare, right? Rare meat, medium rare, something like that. Afilu hu basar gedi, right? Even if it's kid. Why is that? Because once he puts it on the coals, he wants it to cook like fast, even if it gets charred. So therefore, we're concerned that he's going to stir the coals because he wants it to go fast. The thing is, but if it's already cooked, 1/2, right? Not 1/3, 1/2. Then we're not concerned that he's going to stir the coals. Even if it's beef. Why? Since it's fitting to eat as is, right? Then why is he going to stir it up, right? There's no reason, there's no urgent purpose for that, right? So therefore he's not going to do it. We're not concerned about that. Okay, that's bet. So I'll read it again, right, just to review. What we said was like this, right? 3 things. We shouldn't roast meat, right? Eggs and onions, things like this, vegetables, whatever. Agav gechalim, right? On the coals, unless, right, it was already cooked before Shabbat, at least 1/2. Afilu basagadi, even if it's a goat, right, which is a small, thin meat, right, not very massive at all. Why is that? Since he put it on the goals, אינו חושש אלא שיצלה מהרה. אף על פי שיתחרך. He's not really concerned, that to cook it fast, even though it's going to get charred. So therefore, we're concerned that he's going to stir the coals. But if it was already half cooked, there's no more reason to stir anything, right? Because it'll get finished, 1, 2, 3, right? It'll be done. So he says, right? Why? Because why would he stir it? It's just gonna ruin it, right? There's no reason for him to do that. So therefore, he's just gonna, wait, just coast, let it coast along, right, and finish by itself. Why intervene? There's no reason to intervene with the cooking process there. It's almost done as is. It's already edible as is. Okay, that's it. So, all right, we'll go to Gimel. So it says here the tour, Katu beHagot Asheri. It says in Hagot Asheri, right? I think this is Bet Yosef. And Perek Kama de Shabbat, the first Perek of Shabbat. Sheim Avar or Shachach V'nitzla b'Shabbat. What about if he transgressed, right? And he roasted it anyway. In other words, even though it wasn't half roasted, he went ahead anyway and finished it off on Shabbat. So the question is, right, are you allowed to eat that or not? So he says, right, asur, it's forbidden. Because he did something which was forbidden. So it says Bet Yosef regarding this, Katu be'agot Mordechai, right? The matnitin de'en solin basar, batzal, bet shemai, the bet. So he says over there, right? So he brings over here this rabbi who says that this opinion that we just brought here is Bet Shammai, because according to Bet Hillel, they do allow, to cook right before Shabbat. They don't really have any problem with that. So he says, right, Bet Yosef, look what he says, incredible. So he says his words are not correct here. This is a mistake, what he wrote, this rabbi. The matnitin divrei kolhi. So he says this Mishnah is according to everybody. It's not only Bet Shammai. Everybody agrees with it. Why? Because the rabbis decreed perhaps he will, right, to stir up the coals, So even though the prohibition is not from the Torah, nevertheless, right, it is forbidden to tell the goy to not to tell the goy, to do it yourself. It is forbidden. Even though in general, right, we don't make decrees like this with other labors. But when it comes to cooking on the coals, we do. Okay, great. What else we got? Like we said in Gemara, the Bet Hillel Nami Gazur Shemei Chate. Bet Hillel also agrees with this decree. They may come to stir the coals. All poskim pass like that, it says. Then Tzolin, that we don't write. There you go. Okay, so this was all the language of the tour, apparently. So he says, right, Bet Yosef regarding this, B'Mordechi resh pek kira. In the Mordechai, it says this. Katuv dematnitin b'letzorech halayla hu. Right. So he says over there. He says that this whole Mishnah is talking about when you're eating at night the food for your night meal. Because if it's for the morning, share will be allowed. Because we're not concerned that he's going to stir the coals. He says, this rabbi also says this. But he says the other commentaries that I wrote don't seem to say like this. In the beginning of this chapter, rather, they say that since it's fitting to eat at night, he's going to come to stir coals. Even though he's doing it for tomorrow. So what are we talking about here? This rabbi wanted to say that there's a difference between, when it comes to roasting meat, depends on when you want to eat it, right? You want to eat it tomorrow morning or you want to eat it tonight. But says Bet Yosef, this is not really correct, seems like. Because even if you're eating it in the morning, but it's going to be finished tonight, though. It's not going to be all night on the fire because you're just roasting it, right? Which is like a 20-minute job. So that's not really correct. So when it comes to roasting, it doesn't really matter when you're going to eat it. That's not the issue. That only comes into play when you're cooking something raw in the pot, for like a cholent for tomorrow. That's something else. We're not talking about that. Okay, great. So that's that. Let's see the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch like this. Im avar o shachach, right? If he transgressed or forgot, and he left that roasted meat right on the fire, he wasn't supposed to. And it was roasted on Shabbat, in a forbidden manner. Asur, you're not allowed to eat that stuff. So here the rabbis penalize you, whatever, right? Because you didn't do it the right way, even though the prohibition is only rabbinical, but nevertheless, right? They were stringent over here, because if you do this, in the improper way, you're going to come to do right sometimes prohibition from the Torah. You could come to that too. So therefore, they forbade it. That's interesting. Okay, we got time. We can try one more. So says Bet Yosef, אם מותר לתת סביב הקטרה פירות הנחלים חיים אף על פי שאי אפשר שיצולו מבעוד יום, כתב רבנו בסימן רש"ן זין, right? So he says, right, that there's a question like this. Can you put fruits which are eaten raw around the pot? So what's the thing? That it's not really possible that they're going to be like that in this kind of scenario it's not really possible that they're going to be roasted before Shabbat. So he says the Torah deals with this in a different chapter, Reish Nun Zayin, right over there, which is a little bit later on. Anyway, let's see what he says in Shulchan Aruch regarding that. I think he brings the Torah over there. So he says like this: Perot shenechalin chayin, right? Fruits which are eaten raw, right? So you have, your apples and pears and things like this, right? For example, mutar litanam saviv aktera. You're allowed to put them around the pot, which is hot. Even though, right, it's not really possible they're going to get cooked before Shabbat. It says, however, but it says you have to be careful that you shouldn't put back the cover of the pot if it got opened before dark. And don't add to it until it's roasted. Because then it's going to cook faster on Shabbat. Interesting. I got to read this again one more time. Let's go over it. So it says like this, right? One more time. So, so we're talking about fruits which can be eaten raw. So you're allowed to put them around the pot, which is like, the dish inside there. Some food inside, cooking, whatever. Even though it's not possible that they're going to finish cooking, roasting before Shabbat. So why would that be? Why would that be allowed? So I'm thinking to say like this, right? The reason why it's allowed, even though we don't allow this when it comes to meat, but this stuff, we're not really so concerned he's going to come to stir the coals for this stuff, for these fruits, because what does he really care? They're eaten raw as is anyway, so it's no big emergency to get this thing roasted. So we're not concerned he's going to turn up to, stir the coals for that. That's the reason why. So therefore, you're allowed to put them. So how is he doing this? He's putting them like around the pot, which is cooking there, the dish inside. So when they're around the pot, they don't really cook so fast, they go slow. Because it's not really so hot there. Nevertheless, it's allowed. That's one thing. Then he says another thing, right? Which is you got to be careful in a scenario like this not to return the lid of the pot back, to its place. In other words, once you opened it, you shouldn't put it back. And also don't add more to it until it gets baked, roasted. Why? Because all these things, what they do is, they make you cook. It cooks faster like this. So you're accelerating the cooking on Shabbat, which is not allowed, obviously. Making it cook faster. So you see why this is, right? Because when you return the lid to the pot, it cooks faster. The heat is stronger. So what is he talking about? He's talking about that it still isn't fully cooked, right? Once it's fully cooked, you can't cook it twice. So we're talking about it's not fully cooked, and he's telling you, right? Be careful. Don't cover it when it's not fully cooked because you're accelerating the cooking like that. That's a big problem. You're breaking Shabbat like that. That's one thing. Then you have the other issue, right? Which is don't add to it until it's baked, until it's roasted. Because somehow, right, when you add to it, it makes it go faster. So let's see what Mishnah Berurah says about this, if he explains this a little bit. Yeah, so I think what he's saying is like this, right? That number one is to reiterate, right? Number one is don't cover it with the lid, right? Because it'll make it cook faster. Number one. Number two, don't add more covers, to the pot. It'll make it cook faster. Don't make the cover stronger, or thicker, or whatever, larger. That's what he's saying.
So if you put the cover on the pot before Shabbat, and then you take it off, say to serve it or for whatever reason,
Yeah.
you don't.
Yeah.
Put
So
the
if it's
cover
fully
back.
cooked, you could put it back.
If it's fully cooked, okay. But if it's not fully cooked,
here we're talking about it's in the process of cooking.
Okay, gotcha.
This is the problem. You got to be careful about that. Okay, there you go.
Well, what if you don't know if it's fully cooked?
So, well, I don't have to teach you about this. That usually how long a dish takes to cook, right? So you can estimate. You know what I mean? Your dish is a 2-hour dish, right? So you got to wait 2 hours. You know what I mean? That's the thing. But if you're really not sure, you have to be stringent. Why? Because it's from the Torah, this prohibition. You know what I mean?
Okay, so let's say hypothetically, you took the lid off and you're like, oh no, that chicken's still raw. Do you just not put the lid back on?
Yeah, no, you if it's Shabbat already, you shouldn't put it back on. Yeah. So let it just cook like that, right? It'll take a little bit longer. Whatever it is. That's your only choice. You couldn't even tell a goy to do this, by the way, There's no way. There's no way to fix this problem. Okay, whatever. So that's valid. So there's also hay here. But I don't think we're going to be able to do this one today. So Bezrat Hashem, we'll cut it off here and we'll start fresh next week. Thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Chazak Baruch, Leila Tov, Shabbat Shalom. And we'll see you on Sunday, Bezrat Hashem.
Okay, thank you so much.
All the best.